Get all relaxed. Have your cocoa in hand. All right. This is called Orinoco's Quest. Orinoco Sandoval was a 13-year-old hybrid girl with caramel eyes that matched her warm complexion. Her wide, friendly face was framed by long, straight hair, black as a crow, typical of the inhabitants of the lush jungle that bordered the Amazon Sea in the year 2533. She stood atop an ancient Mayan pyramid that gave her an incredible view of the jungle canopy, but her sights were set much farther north toward the land once known as Venezuela. Some still referred to the original country names for convenience, but Orinoco had grown up hundreds of years after the sea levels rose, hundreds of years after the landing, and just as long after deconstruction and restoration had transformed most of the planet back to a relatively natural state. Thus, she knew no borders save those drawn by nature, such as rivers, lakes, mountain ranges, and oceans. The place she would travel to was now known only by its most stunning natural feature, Cueva del Fantasma, which meant the Cave of the Ghost. Though in reality a collapsed gorge rather than a true cave, Fantasma was nevertheless impressive. Its ceiling was over 600 feet high, and it hosted a towering waterfall at the entrance. Orinoco would begin her vision quest there, and then move through the twisting tunnels of the other cave systems nearby in her search for a vision that would reveal her purpose in life. However, it was said that 3 great guardians lived in the caves and that one must pass their tests in order to receive a vision. Orinoco's mother, father, grandparents, and older siblings had been preparing her for the journey that her grandmother, Magdalena, had taken when she was Orinoco's age. Magdalena had invented puzzles and games to sharpen Orinoco's wits and tasks to strengthen her body and boost her confidence, but she was still nervous, especially because her grandmother wouldn't tell her what the guardians were like or what the tests would be. She would only say that each person must find out for themselves or the tests wouldn't count and no vision would come. The only thought that allowed Orinoco to relax, even if only a little, was the knowledge that her grandmother's vision quest led her to become a powerful medicine woman, cherished and respected far and wide for her wisdom and knowledge of healing plants and herbs. So how hard could it really be? Perhaps the suspense at the beginning of the journey was part of the test as well. Orinoco took several deep breaths and gazed upon the verdant jungle that stretched before her. She felt herself grow calm, or at least less nervous. She clambered down the pyramid steps and raced down the dirt path toward home so she wouldn't be late for evening meal. Her mother, Octavia, was making black bean risotto and sweet onions sautéed in lemon garlic sauce, along with plantains drizzled in maple syrup for dessert. It was best if the main meal was eaten while still hot, before it cooled into mushy paste. That night after supper, Orinoco leaned against the wood railing on the wraparound covered balcony of her family's 2-story adobe house, the smell of the jungle in her nostrils as she gazed out at the Amazon Sea through the trees, mesmerized by the moonlight that danced on the water. Her father, Santiago, brought out 2 glasses of sweet tea and handed one to his daughter as he joined her to admire the view. Though Orinoco's mother was a hybrid, Santiago was human, a gentle man of great warmth and deep insights. He stood quietly next to Orinoco and inhaled the night air, perfumed by rare jungle flowers. Papa, see, mija. What if I don't receive a vision? How will I know my purpose? Your purpose is the same as everyone's, to be you the best you can be, Santiago assured her. We each express our purpose differently by acting on what gives us passion in life. Your vision may reveal the best way to follow your passion, may allow you to discover something deep inside yourself that you weren't aware of. If you learn from what the vision shows you and use the knowledge to more fully express your true nature, you will fulfill your purpose in life. Orinoco absorbed her father's wisdom as she sipped her tea. You mean like mother's art? Yes, but it's not just about painting, her father said. It's about what her paintings reveal about her spirit, her soul, and how they act as mirrors for others, to bring forth thoughts and feelings they didn't know were hidden within them until they gazed upon your mother's beautiful works of art. I hope I have a vision as strong as grandmother's, Orinoco said. Santiago's laugh was soft and soothing. Wish for a stronger vision, Miha. Children should aspire to be greater than those who came before. Later, Orinoco tossed and turned in her bed, unable to sleep. All manner of strange creatures inhabited her imagination as she wondered what she might encounter on her quest. Her mother, Octavia, gently knocked and entered. "I thought you'd be awake," she said with a smile. She set a cup of hot peppermint tea on Orinoco's bedside table. The fragrant brew always helped her drift off, although Orinoco wasn't sure she could be lulled into slumber this night. However, the aroma was soothing. She sat up, took the cup in hand, and inhaled the steam as her mother sat next to her on the bed. "You're lucky, Mama," Orinoco said. "I only need to look at you, Miha, to know that." "I mean, because you always knew your gift. You didn't need to go on a vision quest," Orinoco sniffed. "Our callings come to us in different ways," her mother said. "I believe you are luckier than I am." "How am I lucky?" Orinoco said with a puzzled look. "You get to go on a grand adventure like Mama Magda. Who knows what you'll discover on your quest? I'm very excited for you, Orinoco." Orinoco sipped her tea and felt its warmth course through her. "I'll do my best," she promised. Feeling sleepy, she put down the tea and snuggled under the covers. Octavia stood and lowered the room's luminaria to a soft firelight glow. "Just be yourself, Miha, you'll do fine." She kissed Orinoco's cheek. "I wish you could come with me," Orinoco said with a yawn. Octavia's dark eyes reflected the warm glow of the lamp as she held her daughter in a loving gaze. "Just know that when you think of me, I'll be thinking of you." Octavia closed the bedroom door as she left. The scent of peppermint filled the room, and Orinoco slipped into a deep sleep. In her dream, she floated in an endless sea of stars. Early the next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Orinoco set out on her vision quest, water and food secure in her backpack. Her family waved to her from the veranda as she headed down the path. She glanced back and tucked the image of their wide smiles into her memory before she took a deep breath and melted into the jungle. Orinoco walked for half a day before she came to the Cave of the Ghost. It was traditional to stop and rest there on the way to the Vision Caves. So she sat on a large boulder near the entrance and inhaled the cool mist from the thundering waterfall. Invigorated, she laid out some of her favorite fruits and nuts from her backpack onto a crisp white linen napkin. These weren't for her. They were an offering to the nature spirit called Balam that inhabited the enormous cavern. Balam was the guardian of the underworld. So to gain permission to enter the caves where Orinoco would begin her vision quest, an offering had to be made at the Cave of the Ghost first. If Balam accepted the offering, she could continue along the path. If not, she would have to go home and try again another day. She placed the food on a flat rock just beyond the waterfall that cascaded from the plateau high above the cave entrance. As her family had instructed, Orinoco called to the spirit and then went back to her boulder to wait. She wouldn't touch her own food until the offering had been accepted by Balam. Orinoco didn't have to wait long. Balam emerged from the shadows deep within the cave and approached the food. Orinoco had heard tales of this particular nature spirit since she was a young child, but to witness the entity in person sent a shudder through her that was at once both thrilling and terrifying. Balam was what the locals called an alabrije, a chimeric creature with the head and body of a jaguar, ram horns, eagle wings, sharp talons on its hind legs, and the long, sinuous tail of an iguana. It was also gigantic. If it had been a living creature rather than a spirit, it would have easily weighed 1,000 pounds. Orinoco was riveted on the being and felt a sensation like ants crawling on her skin as Balam swept his gaze to her like a searchlight. The chimera lowered its massive head to the food and let out a deep purr loud as an engine. The vibration penetrated Orinoco and released a mist of energy from the fruits and nuts she had offered the spirit. Balam inhaled the etheric vapor, whereby the physical food withered to dust in seconds, as though weeks had passed in a blink. Balam bowed his head to Orinoco in thanks. She had the good sense to bow her head in return. The jaguar spirit plucked a glistening feather from one of its wings with his teeth and laid it on the linen, a sign that Balaam had given Orinoco permission to continue her quest. The jaguar spirit turned and vanished back into the shadows. Orinoco jumped down off her perch and gathered the feather along with the linen. She wasn't sure what else she was supposed to do with the unexpected gift, but she was sure it would somehow help her on her quest once she entered the cave system farther along the path. She quickly ate her midday meal, drank from the waterfall, wrapped the feather in the linen, and carefully tucked it in a side pocket in her pack. She headed out along the path, accompanied by the varied sounds of the jungle, until, a few hours later, she arrived at the foot of a stone stairway that had been carved into the cliff face of a towering mesa. It wound around the formation, sometimes passing through it where tunnels had been cut. The cave where Orinoco would begin her quest was near the top. As she began to climb, Orinoco made sure to keep her eyes on that stairway, as many of the steps were cracked and uneven. She'd heard stories that now and then some who had started the climb lost their footing and fell to their deaths. Her mother and father made her promise to keep her eyes on the path and not be tempted to look out over the countryside as she climbed, no matter how spectacular the view might be. Orinoco felt a wave of vertigo as she neared the top because the staircase was barely wide enough for a single person, and there was no wall or railing to keep one from plummeting to the ground 2,000 feet below. Finally, at dusk, she reached the cave entrance, an ominous-looking gash in the sheer cliff face. She pulled a small luminaria globe, about the size of an orange, from her pack and tapped it to golden light. This was it, the true beginning of her vision quest. She took a deep breath, exhaled, and as she bit her lower lip to hold her fear at bay, she entered the dark cave's yawning maw. The luminaria threw long shadows from the stalactites that hung from the ceiling like jagged teeth. Through the cave had been cut by flowing water eons ago. There were still deep pools in many of the wide chambers that were fed by seasonal rains that dripped through the cracks in the vaulted roof. Orinoco descended deep into the heart of the sandstone monolith. The dancing shadows created by her light took on ominous shapes in her imagination and often startled her. Time felt suspended. Each minute felt like an hour. Orinoco soon lost all sense of time and direction as she walked, climbed, and crawled through the wet, winding pathways. Finally, a faint blue light in one of the branching tunnels caught her attention. She took the passage until it opened into an enormous cavern that sheltered a lagoon that was several hundred feet across. The ghostly glow emanated from deep under the surface of the still water. As Orinoco's eyes adjusted, the eerie luminescence grew brighter. She realized with some apprehension that it was because the light was heading toward her. She stepped back from the narrow ledge that bordered the lagoon and watched from within the shelter of the tunnel. Ripples radiated on the surface as a giant salamander elemental raised its wide, flat head above the water and looked at Orinoco through eyes dark as ink. The ethereal creature emerged from the lagoon and pulled itself onto a large flat boulder where Orinoco could see its slick, slime-coated body. It was a deep bluish-black, splotched with neon blue spots that illuminated the cave. The elemental uttered a challenge with a voice like liquid light. If you wish to pass, then knowledge is your key. The answer's in plain sight. Just tell me what you see. Orinoco gathered her courage and stepped back into the cavern. She looked around as she tried to fathom the salamander's meaning. There was nothing unusual about the cavern except that there were several tunnels on the opposite side of the lagoon that led off in different directions. She didn't see anything that made one tunnel stand out over another. Orinoco wondered how she would know which tunnel to take if she made it past the elemental. That must be the test, she thought. Since there were no other clues in the cave, she turned her attention back to the salamander. Its rubbery skin reminded her of the deep velvety purple color of the night sky just after dusk, when stars began to twinkle. It suddenly hit her. The glowing spots on the elemental's body weren't random. They looked exactly like the constellations her father had taught her about on the evenings they spent staring at the night sky from their balcony. The Pleiades were there, along with the Orion constellation and its 3 belt stars, that if one drew an imaginary line through them, pointed directly at the brightest star in the sky, Sirius. The spot on the salamander that represented Sirius glowed brighter than all the other asterisms on its body. Its light also illuminated one specific tunnel. "Your body is the night sky," Orinoco exclaimed, "and Sirius lights the way." "Well done, daughter of night," the salamander said. "You may continue on your quest." The elemental slipped back into the water, and its body no longer blocked Orinoco's view of the stepping stones that led across the lagoon to the tunnel. She followed the path, entered the tunnel, and continued on her way. The tunnel was filled with sharp, jagged boulders that Orinoco had to climb over or squeeze around. Often she had to remove her backpack and push it ahead of her in order to fit through a narrow space. After what felt like an eternity, she emerged into another large cave, her hands, arms, and legs covered in small cuts from the razor-edged rocks. She stood, held up her luminaria, and peered into the domed cavern. An enormous spider web stretched across the entire expanse of the cave, and in the center, a huge black tarantula with 3 blood-red spots on its abdomen clutched the web with 8 spiny legs, each one 3 times the length of Orinoco's arms and thick as tree branches. Her luminaria was reflected in all 8 of the spider's enormous eyes, but it also revealed several skeletal remains and desiccated corpses caught in the sticky web. Orinoco felt cold fear grip her heart. She took several deep breaths as Magdalena had taught her and slowly felt the warmth of her resolve flood back into her veins. The spider's voice was an eerie whisper that made Orinoco's skin crawl. "If you wish to pass, then stealth will be your key. Make your move along a path that my eyes cannot see." Orinoco studied the web. There were several gaps between the web strands that were large enough for her to pass through without getting stuck, but there was no way to approach the gossamer trap without the spider watching her every move. She thought of extinguishing the luminaria, but then she'd have no way of finding a safe path in the dark. Besides, the tarantula was used to living in the dark. It could probably sense her even if the cave was pitch black. That's it, she realized. The spider lives in the dark. Orinoco held the luminaria over her head and tapped it to full brightness. It was blinding as a miniature sun. The tarantula emitted a high-pitched whine and shielded all 8 eyes with its forelegs. Orinoco ran for the gap in the web before the spider's eyes could adjust. One of the giant arachnid's spine-covered legs shot out to snare her, but Orinoco was through the gap in a flash. The spider's legs scraped against the cave wall with a sound like nails on slate. Orinoco kept running until she was well beyond the tarantula's reach. Orinoco lowered the luminaria's light to a soft glow as the spider rotated its body around and peered at her through the web that prevented it from pursuing her. "Well done, daughter of light," the spider says. "You may continue on your quest." Orinoco bowed her head as a sign of respect and headed down the tunnel at the far end of the spider's den. She continued through the new tunnel, which was more round and smooth than the other passages had been. It twisted and turned and snaked its way through the mountain until it came to a dead end where a waterfall plunged downward into a wide, dark hole. The luminaria did nothing to reveal how deep the hole went, and without a rope in her backpack, Orinoco had the sinking feeling that she would either have to jump into the black pit or go back the way she came to try another route. It didn't make sense to her to face the spider and the salamander again, so she decided to take a leap of faith, as her grandmother must have done. Orinoco held her breath and jumped. She only fell a few yards before the hole curved into a smooth, tubular waterslide. She held the luminaria tight against her chest as the rushing water carried her through curves, dips, straightaways, until the gush of water flushed her from the tunnel and deposited her on her back in a shallow river that coursed through the next cavern. She slid to a stop a few feet from the coiled scales of a titanic sleeping serpent. Orinoco backpedaled toward the tunnel exit. She knew there was no way back up the water-drenched slope, so she stood and pressed her back against the cave wall. She tapped the luminaria down to its dimmest setting in the hope that the serpent would remain asleep if the cave was dark. Orinoco tiptoed to the cave's perimeter as she searched for a path around the snake, but the serpent woke and uncoiled its tail to block her way. Its head rose 10 feet in the air. Its burnished scales gleamed like copper in the dim light. Its glistening yellow eyes stared down at Orinoco as it flicked its forked tongue to taste her fear. She backed away, but there was no place in the cavern the serpent couldn't reach. The only tunnel out was high up on the cave wall. She realized that if she couldn't solve this guardian's challenge, she'd be doomed. If you wish to pass, then perception is the key, the snake hissed. Tell me what is real and what simply cannot be. The snake slithered to the back of the cavern to reveal 3 objects that had been hidden by its massive coils. A small tree with green leaves, a large white stone cube with the words, "This cube is black," chiseled on it, and a conical stalagmite that rose from the cave floor to a height slightly taller than Orinoco. She focused on the tree, the cube, and the stalagmite in turn, as the serpent's riddle played over and over in her mind. Tell me what is real and what simply cannot be. Orinoco's gaze went back to the tree. Its roots dipped into the river that drained from the cavern through cracks in the floor, but they were much too narrow for an escape route. She tapped the luminaria to brighten the light so she could see the tree more clearly. It dawned on her. Light! Without her light source, the cavern would normally be pitch black. A tree cannot grow without light. She pointed to the tree and said, "The tree is not real." As soon as the echo of her words faded, so did the evergreen illusion. Only the cube and the stalagmite remained. "Very good," said the serpent. Orinoco's eyes flickered back and forth between the last 2 objects. Stalagmites were, of course, common to caves, so it could be real. The white cube that proclaimed itself to be black seemed like an obvious fallacy, but it felt too obvious. There was a trick here, but Orinoco struggled to parse it. "May I touch the object?" she asked the snake. "Be my guest," it answered, stretching out the word guest. Orinoco placed her palms on the cube in the chance the white coloring would rub off to reveal blackness underneath. However, the cube retained its alabaster sheen. She turned her attention to the stalagmite. Her eyes tracked upward from the floor to its tip. Her gaze continued upward to the ceiling. Something was wrong, though she couldn't immediately put her finger on it. She brightened her light and craned her neck as she searched the cave roof. There was no sign of a dripping water that would have formed the calcified cone, let alone a stalactite pointing downward. Of course, a stalagmite cannot form without a stalactite forming first. Orinoco pointed to the stalagmite. "This isn't real." The stalagmite crumbled into dust and was washed down the cracks by the river. "Excellent," the snake hissed. The cube was the only thing that remained. But since the tree and the stalagmite were illusions, did that mean the statement on the cube was true? Orinoco thought that maybe it was only an assumption on her part that one of the objects had to be real. Maybe they were all illusions. She puzzled over it for several minutes and thought back to all the puzzles her family had created to train her for this quest. She thought about the science her father taught her, the wisdom her grandmother had shared, and the tricks of light and color her mother used in her art. Light and color, a white cube that said it was black. This was a puzzle about light and color. The serpent said that perception was the key. She remembered the science behind perception. She only saw the cube as white because the full color spectrum was being reflected from the cube to her eyes. No color remained with the cube, therefore the cube was, in fact, actually black. She backed away from the cube and faced the serpent. The cube is real. The cube remained, and the serpent bowed its massive head in respect. "Well done, daughter of sight. You may continue on your quest." The serpent rested its head on the cave floor. "Climb upon me," it said. Orinoco suspected this might be another test and hesitated. "Fear not," said the snake. "I am your way out." She realized what he meant. She gently stepped onto his wide, flat head as he slowly lifted her up to the tunnel high up in the cave wall. Orinoco stepped off into the tunnel and turned to the serpent. Thank you. May your vision be strong, said the snake. Orinoco smiled, bowed, and headed down the tunnel. The path was straight and smooth and opened onto a wide ledge that overlooked the jungle canopy far below. The sky was full of stars, and the full moon frosted everything in silver. Orinoco was transfixed by the beauty of the panorama that stretched to the horizon. She felt that her heart might burst with joy, and that, if she would only spread her arms, she could fly. Then Orinoco remembered the feather that Balaam had gifted to her. She carefully pulled it from her pack and held the quill before her eyes. It gleamed in the moonlight, a symbol of promise and possibilities beyond imagination. Her heart was lifted and her body felt lighter than air. This was her final test, a true leap of faith. She clutched the silvery plume as tight as she could, stretched her arms wide, and sprang from the ledge. But rather than plummet to her death, she rose into the night sky, toward the stars that gleamed like jewels set into the velvet void. Orinoco flew higher and higher until she broke through the atmosphere and sped into space. She flew faster and faster through the airless ocean of stars and suddenly realized that it was her spirit that had soared beyond the grip of Earth's gravity, while her body remained far below in the land of the living. She felt an indescribable freedom, an unbound and limitless potential within her. She understood with sudden crystal clarity that her place and her purpose was among the stars. She was an explorer and would chart a course through the heavens, guided by the stars like the ancient mariners who crossed the oceans to discover new lands. A triangle of constellations coalesced in front of her, a spectral gateway to realms unimagined. Orinoco passed through the gate and shot across the cosmos faster than the speed of light. Her vision climaxed in an incandescent burst, brighter than 1,000 suns. She awoke, back on Earth, and found herself at the base of the steps that led up to the cave where her journey had begun. She had no memory of how she'd made her way down the monolithic mountain. The thought crossed her mind, maybe she'd never gone up, and that the whole journey had happened in a vision. But none of that mattered. She had her vision, she knew her path. She stood and raced homeward through the jungle, eager to share her experience with her family, especially Grandmother Magdalena. Orinoco caught a look of something on her hands as she ran. She stopped and examined them, stunned to find 3 tattoos on the backs of her hands and both index fingers. On the back of her left hand was a salamander. On the back of the right one was a spider. As she brought her thumbs and fingers together to form a triangle, the snake tattoo crossed from one index finger to the other, half of the serpent on each finger splitting it in 2. Orinoco looked more closely at the tattoos. Each had a pattern of dots on its body. A single dot on the salamander, 3 dots on the spider, and several on the snake. She realized from her father's training that the dots represented constellations. Sirius was the single dot on the salamander. This made sense, since that was the star that illuminated her path out of the elemental salamander's lair. The 3 dots on the arachnid were Orion's belt. That constellation was symbolized by a spider in many ancient South American cultures, rather than by a hunter, as in the Northern Hemisphere. Finally, the string of dots along the serpent's body had to be the constellation Draco, the dragon, which after all is a giant serpent. Orinoco had been marked by the 3 elementals so that her vision and her destiny would never be forgotten. She walked through the jungle, her heart calm and filled with a sense of purpose. She didn't know where her journey among the stars would take her, but she knew her life would never be the same. There you go. Did you enjoy that? Thank you. So that'll be in the 3rd book. So you have to get through the 2nd one coming out in the new year before you even get to that. The story is a story within the story that serves a different purpose, which you will find out when you get to the 3rd book. So there are clues within clues within clues within it. So, thank you. If we are ready, I'll let Bashar come through.